I'm 79 years old, and I have seen enough of life to know that people reveal their truest selves not in moments of joy, but in moments of anticipation. Not when they receive, but when they expect. Not when they grieve, but when they calculate. I learned this truth not from a book or a sermon, but from my own children, sitting around my kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon in October, speaking about my belongings as though I had already stopped breathing. My name is Eleanor Marsh. I was born in a farmhouse in rural Kentucky in 1945, the third daughter of a tobacco farmer and a school teacher who between them owned nothing but land, stubbornness, and an unshakable belief that dignity was worth more than comfort. I grew up wearing my sister's shoes, eating cornbread 3 times a week, and reading by the light of a single lamp that my mother placed strategically in the center of the room, so all 4 of us could study at once. We were poor in the way that people used to be poor before poverty became political, quietly, practically, without drama or complaint. I married Gerald Marsh when I was 22. He was a mechanical engineer with patient eyes and a laugh that started somewhere deep in his chest before it ever reached his mouth. We built our life together slowly and carefully, the way you build anything meant to last. Gerald worked for 31 years at the same company. I taught elementary school for 26 years and raised 3 children in a 4-bedroom house on Sycamore Lane that we bought in 1971 for $42,000, and that is now, according to the county assessor's office, worth just under $800,000. Gerald died 6 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, 11 weeks from diagnosis to funeral, which is both a mercy and a violence depending on the hour you ask me. He was 73. I was 73. We had been married 50 years and 2 months, and when they lowered him into the ground on a cold February morning, I felt something shift inside me that has never quite shifted back. Not broken exactly, rearranged. Like furniture moved in the dark. After Gerald died, I did what women of my generation do. I kept going. I tended my garden. I attended church. I had my Thursday lunches with my friend Miriam, who is 81 and sharper than most 40-year-olds I have met. I babysat my grandchildren when asked. I learned to manage the finances Gerald had always handled, which turned out to be less complicated than he had made it seem, though I kept that observation to myself out of respect for his memory. My 3 children are David, who is 54 and lives 20 minutes away and works in commercial real estate; Patricia, who is 51 and lives in Atlanta with her husband Raymond and their 2 teenage daughters; and my youngest, Thomas, who is 48, recently divorced, and lives in the apartment above a dry cleaning shop he owns in the next town over. They are all, in their various ways, good people. I want to be honest about that. They are not villains. Villains are easier. My children are something more complicated and more human than villains. They are people who love me and also love what I might leave behind, and who have not yet learned that those 2 loves can poison each other if you are not very careful. It began, as so many things begin, with a health scare. Last spring I had a small stroke. The doctors were reassuring in the way doctors are when they want you to be calm, telling me it was mild, that I had recovered beautifully, that with medication and monitoring there was every reason to expect many more years of quality life. And they were right. I felt fine within a week. A little tired, a little humbled, but fine. What I did not anticipate was what the stroke would do to my children. David called every day for the first 2 weeks. Patricia flew up from Atlanta and stayed for 10 days. Thomas came by every evening after closing the shop. Their attention was warm and genuine, and I received it gratefully. But then, somewhere around the 3rd week, something in the quality of that attention began to change. It became less about how I was feeling and more about what I was planning, less about my health and more about my house. The questions became careful and indirect, the way questions do when people want information they are not quite willing to ask for directly. David mentioned almost casually over coffee one morning that he had always loved the house, and that if I ever decided to downsize, he hoped I would think of family first before involving a real estate agent. Patricia, during a phone call, suggested that perhaps I should think about updating my will, given everything, and mentioned that she and Raymond had always struggled with Atlanta's property values, and that any help, in any form, would be so deeply appreciated. Thomas, less subtle than his siblings because he has always been less subtle, actually asked me directly one evening whether I had thought about who would get the house. I told Thomas I had not decided anything yet. I did not tell him that I had in fact decided everything, but I had decided it quietly, privately, and with great deliberateness, and I was not yet ready to share it. What happened next was the Sunday in October. I had invited them all for dinner, a normal enough occurrence, and after we ate, after the dishes were cleared and the grandchildren had gone to watch television in the den, my 3 children sat around my kitchen table and began, in lowered voices that they did not lower quite enough, to divide my house. I was in the hallway. I had gotten up to use the restroom and was returning when I heard David's voice, careful and measured, saying that the master bedroom furniture alone was worth having appraised. Patricia said she had always loved my mother's china cabinet and that it held enormous sentimental value for her. Thomas said he thought it was only fair that since he lived closest and had helped out the most since Gerald died, he should have some priority consideration regarding the house itself. And then they began to negotiate. Not cruelly, not with malice, but with the practiced efficiency of people who have been thinking about this for a long time and are finally saying out loud what they have been thinking privately. They spoke about square footage and market value, and what was fair, and what they each needed and deserved. I stood in the hallway for a long time. I want to tell you that I was devastated. That would be the expected response, and it would be partly true. There was a pain in it, a particular kind of pain that has no clean name. The pain of seeing people you love behave in ways that diminish them. But there was something else, too. Something quieter and more complicated. Because standing in that hallway, listening to my children divide what I had not yet finished living in, I felt something crystallize inside me. A decision that had been forming for months became suddenly, completely clear. I walked back into the kitchen. I sat down at the table. I looked at each of my children in turn. David with his careful eyes, Patricia with her gracious smile, Thomas with his nervous hands. And I said very calmly that I had heard what they were discussing, and that I thought it was time we talked openly about the house and about my plans. The silence that followed had texture to it. I told them that I appreciated their concern for my well-being, and that I understood money was a real pressure for all of them in different ways. I told them that I had been thinking carefully about my wishes since the stroke, and that I had in fact made some decisions. I told them that I thought it was best to be transparent rather than leave things uncertain. Then I told them I had hired an estate attorney 3 months ago. David nodded. Patricia looked relieved. Thomas leaned forward. I told them that I had spent the last 3 months reviewing everything Gerald and I had built together. The house, the investments, the savings, the small parcel of land in Kentucky that had been in my mother's family, and that Gerald had always insisted we hold on to. I told them I had thought very hard about what was fair and what was right, and what Gerald would have wanted and what I wanted. Then I said that I had decided to sell the house. Patricia's expression shifted. David set down his coffee cup. Thomas made a sound that was not quite a word. I told them that I had already spoken with a real estate agent, not David's firm, which I acknowledged might sting, and that we had agreed on a listing price, and that the house would go on the market in the spring. I told them that I had also arranged to move into a senior living community 20 minutes away, one I had toured 4 times and found genuinely lovely, with a garden I could tend and a library, and people my own age who were interested in things I was interested in. I told them that I was looking forward to it. The money from the house, I told them, was not going to be divided among them. I let that sentence breathe for a moment. I told them that I had established a charitable trust, that the primary beneficiary of that trust was the elementary school in the county in Kentucky where my mother had taught for 38 years, a school that was still standing, still serving rural children, and that was desperately underfunded. I told them that a significant portion was also going to a literacy organization I had volunteered with for 12 years, and another portion to a scholarship fund at the university where Gerald had done his graduate work. My children were very quiet. I told them that this did not mean they were receiving nothing. Gerald and I had other assets. There would be inheritance. It would be fair and it would be meaningful, and they would each receive something that reflected both our love for them and our belief that they were capable adults who did not need to be rescued. But the house, this specific house, this particular dream that Gerald and I had built together over 53 years on Sycamore Lane, was not going to be the instrument of their financial relief or their real estate calculations. Patricia said very carefully that she was surprised. I told her I had counted on that. David said he thought maybe we should talk to the attorney together, as a family, to make sure everyone understood the implications. I told him the implications were not complicated, and that the attorney had been very thorough. Thomas did not say anything for a long time, and then he said quietly that he supposed he understood, even if he didn't entirely. I told Thomas that was honest, and I respected it. What happened over the following weeks was not what you might expect if you have been raised on stories where revelations produce immediate transformation. My children did not have a dramatic change of heart over a single conversation. They did not immediately become their best selves. David was distant for several weeks. Patricia called less frequently. Thomas was awkward in the particular way of someone who knows they have been seen doing something they are not proud of and cannot quite figure out how to move past it. But here is what else happened. About a month after that Sunday dinner, Thomas showed up at my door on a Tuesday evening with no particular reason given, and we sat on the porch and drank tea and talked for 2 hours about nothing important. About his ex-wife, about a customer at the shop who amused him, about whether the maple tree in the front yard was going to need attention in the spring. He did not mention the house. He did not mention inheritance. He talked to me the way he used to talk to me when he was young, and I was just his mother, and neither of us was thinking about what I would leave behind. Patricia called one evening and asked if she could bring the girls up for a long weekend in November, and when they came, she spent most of the time in the kitchen with me, learning how to make the apple cake that her grandmother used to make, and that I had been making for 50 years. She wrote the recipe down in her own handwriting and said she wanted to have it forever. She did not mention the china cabinet. David came over one Saturday and spent 4 hours helping me sort through Gerald's workshop in the garage, his tools, his projects, the half-finished birdhouse he had been building the autumn before he died. David held that birdhouse for a long time without speaking. Then he asked if he could have it. Not the house, not the furniture, the unfinished birdhouse his father had been making. I told him of course he could have it, and he put it carefully in his car and drove away, and I stood at the window and watched him go. These things do not make a simple story. They do not resolve cleanly into a lesson or a moral. My children are works in progress, as all people are, as I am. The stroke reminded me of my own impermanence. It reminded my children of the same thing, And they responded to that reminder the way frightened people often do, by trying to secure something, hold something, make sure they would not be left with nothing when the inevitable came. I understand that. I do not entirely forgive it, but I understand it. What I wanted them to understand, what I hope in some slow and imperfect way they are beginning to understand, is that what I am leaving them cannot be assessed by a county assessor, or listed on a market or divided at a kitchen table. It is in the apple cake recipe written in Patricia's handwriting. It is in the unfinished birdhouse in David's garage. It is in the Tuesday evening conversations on the porch with Thomas that are gradually becoming a habit again. Gerald used to say that a person's real estate is not the property they own, but the space they occupy in other people's lives. He said it better than I just did because Gerald always said things better than I do. But that was the idea. The house on Sycamore Lane is wood and plaster and memory, and I loved it, and I will miss it. But it is not me. It never was me. What is me is older and stranger and less appraisable than any house. I am moving in April. The Packers will come the week before, and I have already begun sorting through 53 years of accumulated living, deciding what to take and what to give and what to simply let go of. I am keeping Gerald's reading chair. I am keeping my mother's quilt. I am keeping the photograph of all 5 of us, Gerald, me, David, and Patricia, and Thomas, all much younger and squinting into the sun, taken on a beach in the Outer Banks in 1987, which is, I have always thought, the best picture anyone ever took of our family. I am 79 years old. My house is sold and my trust is established, and my room at Sunridge is waiting for me with a window that faces east, which means I will have morning light, which is the only light I have ever really needed. I have outlived my husband and my sister Margaret and my friend Dorothy, and at least a dozen people I expected to outlive me. I have more past than future, which sounds sad but is, in its way, a kind of freedom. There is less to protect, less to fear, less to keep. My children are learning something, I think, slowly, imperfectly, in the way that real learning happens, not in a single moment of revelation, but in a gradual accumulation of small moments that eventually add up to something like wisdom. I am learning things too. I am learning that love and expectation can live in the same heart at the same time, and that the presence of one does not cancel the other. I am learning that being surprised by your children, even painfully, is better than not being surprised, because surprise means they are still capable of becoming something other than what they already are. I am learning that 80 is not a wall, but a window, and the view from here, it turns out, is something I would not trade. On the last night I will spend in this house, whenever that night comes, whatever March evening finds me walking through these rooms one final time, touching the walls Gerald and I chose together, standing in the kitchen where I made 10,000 meals and heard my children's first words, and watched the seasons change through the same window for half a century. On that night, I will not grieve. I decided that already. I will remember, which is different. Remembering is something you carry forward. Grief is something you carry the weight of. Gerald would approve of what I have done. I know this the way I know a few things, not because I can prove it, but because I knew him for 50 years. And loving someone for 50 years means you carry their judgment inside you like a compass. He would have laughed, that deep in the chest laugh, at the expression on David's face when I said I was selling the house. He would have nodded slowly, seriously, at the trust and what it will do for those children in Kentucky who are sitting around a single lamp right now, reading the way I once did. He would have been proud. I am proud. That is enough. I am Eleanor Marsh. I am 79 years old. I still tend my garden and attend my church and have Thursday lunches with Miriam, who says I am the most interesting person she knows, which is generous of her and probably not entirely accurate, but which I receive gratefully. I have 3 children who are works in progress, and 4 grandchildren who give me uncomplicated joy, and 1 dead husband who I will love until I join him, whenever that is, without hurry. I let my children divide my house before I was gone. I stood in the hallway and I listened, and I let them be exactly as small as fear had made them, because I have been small myself and I know how it happens and I do not hold it against them. And then I surprise them, not out of cruelty and not out of cleverness and not out of any desire to punish or prove a point. I surprise them because I am still here, because I am still, at 79, a person with intentions and values and the legal right to dispose of my property exactly as I see fit. Because the most important thing I can leave my children is not a house or a bank account or a china cabinet, but the knowledge that their mother was, until the very end, fully and completely herself. That is the inheritance that cannot be contested. That is the will that does not require a notary. That is what I am leaving them, whether they are ready to receive it or not.